Escort him out. Now. Victoria Langford's order cracked across the banquet hall like a whip. Her voice, sharp and deliberate, didn't just address security, it was meant for the entire room. A woman in crimson silk, poised beneath the chandeliers, she radiated the kind of authority that enjoyed humiliation as theater. And tonight, her chosen stage was Marcus Reed. He stood near the marble entryway of the Grand Marquis Hotel, hands calm at his sides, a single glass of sparkling water untouched on the tray before him. No entourage, no glossy badge, no signifier of wealth that this room had been conditioned to recognize. To Victoria, that absence was an invitation to dismiss him publicly, to paint him as an intruder. "This is a private banquet," she sneered, eyes sweeping over the crowd to ensure they were listening. "Guests here are vetted. You are not." A low stir rippled through the white linen tables. Politicians paused mid-conversation. Bankers exchanged smirks. Billionaire donors leaned in, whispering as if Marcus were a disruption, not a man. The chandeliers glowed, but the air was suddenly brittle. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. He didn't flinch. Not when Victoria lifted her hand toward security. Not when a few chuckles broke out at table 12. Not even when someone muttered "crasher" under their breath. Marcus simply breathed slow, steady, anchored to the floor like marble itself. This banquet wasn't just another dinner. It was the unveiling of a $4 billion alliance between two corporate giants. Every person in the room believed they belonged to an untouchable circle of power. And then Marcus walked in, silent, observing, present in a way that unsettled. Elena Torres, a young journalist seated near the back, tilted her phone at an angle, recording discreetly. She had sensed it the moment Victoria's tone shifted. Something larger than arrogance was unraveling. Marcus had seen this exact scene before. At 27, barred from an investors' conference despite holding a printed invitation. At 35, denied access to a hotel lounge in a property his company already owned. And now, at Furio Fura, again different faces, same verdict. The difference tonight? The stakes, the audience, and the fact that every eye was about to witness what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness. The room didn't breathe. Security stepped closer, black suits and earpieces, waiting for Victoria's nod. She gave it with a flick of her wrist, a gesture that carried the weight of arrogance rehearsed over years. "Remove him," she repeated, louder now. Her voice wasn't just for Marcus, it was for every senator, investor, and socialite seated at those tables. She wanted witnesses. She wanted applause. Marcus didn't move. He simply placed his glass back on the tray, the stem clicking against crystal like a gavel. His silence was defiance, but it wasn't loud. It was sharper than any protest. Victoria stepped forward, her heels striking the marble floor in measured rhythm. "Men like you sneak into places you can't afford," she said, plucking the untouched glass from the tray and setting it aside like evidence. "Trying to mingle, trying to pretend. It's insulting." Laughter slipped from one corner of the room. A hedge fund partner whispered. "Who let him in?" Another murmured. "Probably staff." The words floated like smoke, toxic, unchecked. At table 7, Elena Torres kept her phone angled low, her thumb hovering over record. She knew if she stopped now, the truth would vanish into Victoria's version of events. Marcus's eyes tracked Victoria, calm, unshaken. Inside, though, memory flickered 20 years earlier, turned away from a job interview despite holding 2 degrees, told he didn't look the part. That phrase had burned into him like acid. Tonight, the same prejudice wore a gown and a diamond necklace, but its script hadn't changed. A waiter shifted uneasily nearby, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. He whispered to another, "That man's too calm. He's not just anyone." The second waiter glanced nervously toward Victoria, then back to Marcus, uncertain. "Security," Victoria barked, sharper now. "Why are you hesitating? Take him out." The 2 guards advanced. One reached for Marcus's arm. Elena caught the moment, her camera capturing the pause, the imbalance between calm and aggression. Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was low, deliberate, meant to carry across the charged silence. "Touch me again, and you'll regret it." The words didn't come as a threat, but as a promise, steady, absolute. The guards froze, caught between Victoria's command and the force of Marcus's certainty. "Do you hear this?" Victoria scoffed, spinning toward the audience. "He's threatening us. This is exactly why men like him don't belong at events like this." Her tone dripped with triumph, as if she'd just proven her point. But the room wasn't laughing anymore. It was tense, waiting to see if the man she dismissed would remain silent, or if the silence was over. "Enough!" Victoria's voice cracked through the chandeliers, sharper than the clinking of silverware. She pointed at Marcus like he was a trespasser caught red-handed. "He's a fraud. Throw him out." The guard stepped forward again, this time with more resolve. One grabbed Marcus's sleeve, pulling just enough to signal dominance. Gasps rippled across the banquet. Forks scraped against porcelain. A senator muttered, "This is getting messy," while another guest whispered, "Why isn't he resisting?" Marcus didn't resist. He stood, still as stone, his eyes locked on Victoria. Silence hung from him like armor, and that unsettled her more than any protest could. "You hear that?" She turned to the crowd, her red dress gleaming under the lights. "Not a word, because he knows he doesn't belong here." The room murmured. Some nodded, complicit in her narrative. Others shifted uneasily. Elena's phone recorded every second the tug on Marcus's sleeve, Victoria's performance, the audience's divided reactions. One of the waiters whispered too loudly, "This doesn't feel right." His colleague nudged him, eyes wide, but it was too late. A guest at table 9 caught the words and muttered, "He's right. Something's off." Victoria leaned closer to Marcus, her perfume sharp, her smile colder than the marble floor beneath them. "Say something," she hissed. "Defend yourself, or will you let us decide who you really are?" Marcus's breath was steady, but his memory wasn't. He saw flashes age 23, denied an apartment lease because the landlord said the neighbors wouldn't feel comfortable. Age 30, turned away at a boardroom door until someone recognized his name. And now, at 44, accused of crashing a banquet in a building where his signature already hung on contracts, Victoria straightened, raising her glass for effect. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "let this be a reminder. Our world has standards, and when someone doesn't meet them, we protect our circle." The arrogance was electric. Some guests clapped hesitant, awkward, but complicit. Others looked down at their plates, unwilling to engage. Elena's pulse raced. Through her lens, she caught Marcus's face calm, unreadable, but in his stillness, something was shifting. Security tugged again. The tension reached a knife's edge. And then Marcus spoke, his voice even, measured, but carrying through every corner of the hall. "You're destroying this room with every word that leaves your mouth." The hall froze, not because he had shouted he hadn't, but because the silence after was heavier than applause. The silence after Marcus's words lingered like smoke. Victoria lowered her glass, unsettled by the calm in his tone. "Oh, please," she scoffed, forcing a laugh that didn't land. Empty words from an empty seat. "Security, I won't repeat myself." One guard tightened his grip on Marcus's arm. The other moved in, hand brushing the inside of his jacket, ready to push him toward the exit. The room hummed with unease, half hungry for spectacle, half horrified by the unraveling dignity on display. Elena Torres kept filming, her breath shallow. Through her lens, she captured the imbalance. A man standing still, treated like a criminal, while the host of the banquet wielded humiliation as entertainment. Marcus's eyes swept the hall, steady and deliberate. He saw the board members at table 3 shifting in their seats. He saw Richard Cho, the rival CEO, smirking at the spectacle, satisfied that the room's power remained in familiar hands. And he saw the servers along the wall, eyes wide, silent witnesses who knew the truth was slanting in real time. "Do it!" Victoria snapped, her voice sharper now. "Remove him! This is not his place." That was when Marcus reached into his pocket, slow enough for the guards to tense but calm enough to disarm suspicion. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single button, and raised it to his ear. "Anthony," he said, voice low but resonant, "activate Phase 1. The words weren't loud, yet they carried. They ricocheted off the marble and chandeliers, threading into every ear within reach. The guards hesitated. Victoria's smile faltered. On the other end, Anthony Miles, his executive assistant, answered without delay. "Confirmed, sir. Protocol engaged. Boardroom notifications sent." His tone was crisp, businesslike. The kind of efficiency that doesn't belong to an imposter, whispers erupted. "Did he say boardroom?" What's phase one? Who is this guy? Victoria laughed too quickly, too loudly, her composure cracking. Listen to this, pretending to be someone important. Pathetic. She gestured to the guards. Take him out before his fairy tales infect the room. But the guards didn't move. They'd heard the shift in his voice, the certainty that didn't match Victoria's performance. Marcus lowered the phone, his gaze never leaving hers. Every word you've spoken tonight is being logged, he said. Every insult, every command. And soon, every guest in this hall will know exactly who failed this test. Elena's heart pounded. She zoomed in, catching the flicker of doubt on Victoria's face. It was subtle, but it was there. You think a phone call scares me? Victoria sneered, but her tone lacked the polish it had carried moments earlier. You don't belong here. That's the only truth in this room. Marcus didn't blink. No, he said, calm, deliberate. The only truth is about to walk through those doors. All eyes shifted toward the grand double doors at the far end of the hall. The guards hesitated, caught in the limbo between command and consequence. Guests craned their necks, unsure whether to laugh, clap, or hold their breath. And Victoria, her hand tightened on the stem of her glass until her knuckles whitened. For the first time, the stage she had built for humiliation no longer felt safe. It felt like a trap of her own making. The banquet doors stayed shut. No cavalry, no dramatic entrance. Just the stillness of a room watching one man stand against a chorus of power. Victoria seized the pause like oxygen. She raised her glass high again, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmur. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled by theatrics. This man is trespassing. He is not a guest, not a member, not a name that belongs in this hall. He's here to disrupt, nothing more. She paced as she spoke, the crimson of her gown trailing like fire across the marble floor. Security, if you refuse to do your job, then I'll do it for you. She snatched Marcus's sleeve herself, yanking at the fabric with manicured fingers. Gasps echoed. Phones discreetly lifted. The humiliation wasn't just a threat now, it was physical. Marcus didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on hers, a calm so steady it felt like defiance. You're quiet because you have nothing, Victoria hissed, her face inches from his. No invitation, no wealth, no power, just arrogance. At table 6, a guest whispered too loudly, why would he call someone if he wasn't connected? Another answered, because he's bluffing. The divide in the room widened, half dismissing him, half starting to wonder. Elena's camera caught every angle. The pull on Marcus's sleeve, the sneer on Victoria's lips, the hesitation in the guard's stance. She whispered into her mic, barely audible. This is bigger than it looks. Marcus's memory flashed again, age 32, stopped at the entrance of a gala, told to use the service door because deliveries don't come through the front. He remembered the sting then, but tonight he didn't flinch. He had already outgrown humiliation. Victoria turned toward the guests, her voice booming under the chandeliers. This is what happens when we let anyone in. Standards collapse, reputation collapses. Do you want that for our industry? For this alliance? Some clapped weakly, uncertain. Others folded their arms. The room felt split down the center, like glass about to crack. Marcus finally spoke, his words calm but deliberate, each one placed like stone. You've mistaken silence for weakness. That's your last mistake. The laughter died. The clapping stopped. For the first time, Victoria didn't have the room, and somewhere in the back, a guest murmured what everyone else was starting to think. Who exactly is he? The hall was no longer elegant. It was charged, brittle with tension. Guests leaned forward in their seats, forks idle, champagne warming in untouched glasses. Victoria gripped Marcus's sleeve tighter, her smile sharpened into something vicious. You see, she said, turning her head so the audience could catch every syllable. This is how imposters behave, quiet until they're exposed. He has nothing. But her voice was a little too loud now, her tone strained, as if volume could substitute for certainty. At table 3, Richard Cho smirked into his wine, satisfied at the spectacle. At table 7, Elena's recording didn't miss a word. Her heart pounded. She knew this was the moment people would either side with arrogance or awaken to its ugliness. One of the servers, a young man no older than 25, shifted near the wall. His voice trembled, but it carried. I saw his name on the list, he said quietly. Heads snapped in his direction. This afternoon, when we were setting the tables, I saw it. Reed, Marcus Reed. The room gasped. Victoria's eyes narrowed, daggers flashing toward the server. Stay out of this, she snapped. You don't know what you saw. The young man swallowed hard but didn't retreat. I know what I saw. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Marcus Reed? Wait, isn't that? No, it can't be. Doubt crept across the tables, eating away at Victoria's control. Marcus still hadn't raised his voice. He lifted his phone again, pressed the line, and spoke with deliberate calm. Anthony, Phase 2. On the other end, Anthony Miles's voice was clear, steady. Confirmed, sir. Notifications are live. Corporate compliance is monitoring. Every word is logged. The guards froze. The guests froze. Elena nearly dropped her phone. This wasn't the tone of a man bluffing. This was the cadence of authority. Victoria forced a laugh, brittle as glass. What a performance! Logging words? Compliance? Do you all hear this? She gestured to the guests, her voice rising with desperation. He's fabricating, trying to intimidate us with lies. But her laughter didn't spread. It died in the air, leaving her alone with it. Marcus lowered the phone, his gaze steady. You've already lost, Victoria. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because you just told the wrong man he doesn't belong. The silence that followed wasn't agreement yet, but it wasn't applause for her either. It was the fragile beginning of a shift, and for the first time, Victoria's hand slipped from his sleeve. The young server's words hung in the air like a spark in dry wood. Marcus Reed. The name itself carried a weight, even if not everyone in the room knew why. Victoria's smile faltered for half a second, but she recovered with the speed of someone used to controlling narratives. She raised her hand, gesturing broadly to the guests as if conducting an orchestra. Do not be swayed by staff, she snapped. He's trying to manipulate the room to embarrass us. There is no Marcus Reed on tonight's list. This is an act. But her words were jagged now, each one chipped with impatience. From the back, a man in a gray suit spoke up. Then why did your own staff say otherwise? His tone wasn't loud, but it cut. Others shifted in their chairs, emboldened by the simple question. Richard Cho chuckled, lifting his glass higher. This is absurd! If he really were someone, he'd show proof. Until then, we're wasting our time. Marcus finally moved, not rushing, not lashing out. He straightened his jacket, a small adjustment that carried the gravity of a man preparing to speak. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the banquet hall. You've accused me of being a fraud, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. You've called me an intruder. You've tried to drag me out in front of witnesses. But I'm still standing here. Ask yourselves why. The silence that followed was not weakness. It was a mirror, a reflection cast back on the guests who had laughed, whispered, or clapped too soon. Victoria's jaw tightened. She clapped her hands once, sharp and commanding. Security. This ends now. He leaves, or I'll personally see to it you're all replaced. But the guards hesitated. They weren't blind to the shift in the air, the murmurs threading through the crowd, the unease gnawing at certainty. They had carried out removals before, but never like this, never against someone who radiated authority without saying much at all. Elena zoomed her camera in closer, whispering into her mic. He's not bluffing. He doesn't have to. Victoria turned on her heel, addressing the audience like a performer desperate to salvage her act. Do you want this alliance to collapse because a stranger staged a stunt? Her voice was rising now, theatrical but fraying. This man is wasting our time. He is nothing. And that word nothing landed wrong. It didn't sting Marcus. It unsettled the room. Guests exchanged glances, some frowning, others leaning back in quiet discomfort. The word carried too much contempt, too much history, spoken with the carelessness of someone who thought the world existed to serve her. Marcus let the word hang, then answered it with a single, deliberate line. If I were nothing, you wouldn't be this afraid. The room froze. Elena gasped softly. Even Richard Cho lowered his glass, his smirk faltering. Victoria blinked, her breath caught in her throat. For the first time that night, she didn't have a line ready. Marcus raised his phone again, calm as ever. Anthony, he said, Phase 3. On the other end, Anthony's voice was clear, efficient, unshakable. Confirmed. Corporate board engaged. Compliance reports are live streaming. And Sir Victoria Langford's prior service complaints are already flagged. 8 of them, all involving bias, all filed, none escalated. Gasps rippled across the banquet. Guests turned their eyes on Victoria, whispers swelling like a tide. And in that moment, The cracks in her power weren't whispers anymore. They were fractures. The banquet hall, moments ago filled with laughter and chatter, was now silent enough to hear the hum of the chandeliers. Every eye was locked on Marcus. Every whisper about Phase 3, about compliance, about flagged complaints, hung like smoke in the air. Victoria's face flushed crimson, her confidence splintering under the weight of murmurs. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Bored, compliance, you're bluffing. He's bluffing. None of this is real." Marcus turned to her fully now, his posture composed, his gaze steady. He slipped his phone into his pocket and spoke clearly, his words carrying with measured weight. "Bluffing doesn't trigger emergency board notifications. Bluffing doesn't pull compliance records in real time. And bluffing," he said, pausing long enough for the silence to thicken, "doesn't buy a $4 billion competitor." Gasps erupted. A woman at table 2 dropped her fork. A senator leaned back, eyes wide. Richard Cho's smirk evaporated, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. Marcus let the revelation settle, then added the final blow. "As of tonight, I own the very company you thought would eclipse me, which means this banquet, this alliance, it belongs to me now." The room fractured. Some guests applauded instinctively. Others murmured in disbelief. Elena's camera shook in her hands, her pulse racing as she realized she was capturing a story that would explode far beyond these walls. Victoria stumbled backward a step, her heel catching on the marble. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't possible. Someone would have told me. I would have known." Marcus didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. His stillness was its own form of gravity. "The only thing you knew," he said, his voice low but cutting, "was how to humiliate a man you thought didn't belong. And you were wrong." The weight of his words settled over the hall like a final curtain. Guests who had once laughed now looked down at their plates. The guards who had nearly dragged him away stepped back, eyes lowered. And Victoria, once the center of the room, stood alone, drowning in the silence she had created. The silence shattered like glass underfoot. Guests erupted into whispers, the kind that carried more power than applause. "Did he say 4 billion?" one gasped. "He owns the deal now, he owns the room," another whispered, voice tinged with awe. At table 3, Richard Cho's face drained of color. His rival, the man he had dismissed as insignificant, had just bought everything he thought untouchable. He lowered his glass, staring into the stem as though it had betrayed him. Victoria swayed on her heels, clutching at her gown as if fabric could anchor her. This can't be real," she stammered. "You're lying. All of you are falling for it. He's not who he says he island." But her words didn't land anymore. The audience had shifted. Eyes that once followed her every gesture now turned cold, judgmental. Some guests even angled their phones away from Marcus and toward her, capturing the unraveling of a woman who had ruled the room minutes earlier. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply stood, centered, while the banquet rearranged itself around the truth. Elena's camera caught the pivotal moment, the guards stepping back, uncertainty in their posture, their earlier arrogance dissolved into silence. One muttered under his breath, "We almost put hands on the owner." The young server who had first spoken up straightened, his voice steadier now. "I told you his name was on the list." His courage, once fragile, ignited the crowd. Guests began nodding, murmuring agreement, no longer afraid to align themselves with what they knew was right. Victoria's hands trembled. She turned to the crowd, her eyes wide, desperate. "Are you all blind? He doesn't belong here. He—" Enough. The word came not from Marcus, but from one of the senators at table 2, his voice carrying authority sharpened by decades. "You've humiliated yourself. And worse, you've humiliated this hall." Applause broke out, not roaring, but firm, deliberate. Guests rose slowly, clapping not for Victoria, but for Marcus. The sound built like a tide, washing her arrogance off the marble floor. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice calm, unshaken. "You tried to erase me in front of witnesses. Now the witnesses are yours. Every one of them will remember who you chose to be tonight." Victoria stood frozen, her power drained, her reflection fractured in every raised phone. And in that moment, the woman who once controlled the banquet became its cautionary tale. Victoria's hands trembled, her voice caught somewhere between outrage and desperation. "You can't do this," she spat, though no one had asked her a question. "This is my event. You don't get to—" Marcus cut her off without raising his tone. This isn't your event anymore." The words struck like a gavel. He pulled his phone from his pocket once more, pressing a single contact. "Anthony," he said, steady as ever, "terminate Victoria Langford's contract. Effective immediately." The line was clear, efficient, merciless. "Confirmed, sir. Access revoked. Credentials frozen. Notifications sent to the board." Gasps rippled across the room. A few guests craned their necks toward Victoria, almost expecting to see the color drain from her badge, her phone, her very presence. Her clutch buzzed in her hand. She fumbled it open, her screen lighting up with alerts. Access denied. Credentials revoked. Effective immediately. "No." Her voice cracked. "This isn't possible. I've worked here for 15 years. You can't just erase me." Marcus's gaze never wavered. "You erased yourself the moment you decided humiliation was policy." Applause spread again. Stronger now. A wave of approval not just for Marcus, but for the justice unfolding before their eyes. The young server straightened with pride. Elena caught every second, her lens drinking in the unraveling of a woman who had just been stripped of power in real time. Richard Cho leaned back in his chair, silent, his earlier arrogance shattered. He wasn't watching Victoria anymore, he was watching Marcus, recognizing the kind of power that didn't need volume or spectacle. Victoria stumbled, clutching at the edge of a table. "You don't understand. You can't just walk in here and—" Marcus's reply was final, surgical. "I didn't walk into your banquet. You walked into mine. And now, you're leaving it for the last time." The guards who once reached for Marcus now turned to her, hesitant but compelled. The crowd parted, not for Victoria's exit as she once commanded, but for her removal. Phones lifted higher, capturing the moment her reign collapsed. And through it all, Marcus remained calm, unshaken, the only figure in the hall whose dignity hadn't fractured. Victoria's voice cracked as she tried one last time to claw back her authority. "This isn't over," she shouted, though her words trembled more than they thundered. "You can't erase me from this industry. I made this room. I am this room." But the room itself disagreed. Guests leaned back, eyes cold. Some shook their heads openly. Others whispered into their phones, already spreading the downfall across social media. Elena's camera stayed fixed on Victoria's face, capturing every flicker of panic, every fracture of confidence. The guards stepped closer, their earlier hesitation gone. They no longer looked at Marcus for instruction. They looked at Victoria as if she were just another guest who had overstayed her welcome. "Ma'am," one of them said quietly, "it's time to go." She resisted, pulling her arm free. "Don't you dare put hands on me. Do you even know who I am?" Marcus's voice carried over hers, calm but commanding. "They know exactly who you are, and after tonight, so will everyone else." The silence that followed was crushing. Victoria's eyes darted across the room, searching for allies, for anyone willing to stand with her. But the same guests who once laughed at her jokes and followed her cues now stared down at their plates. She was alone. The guards guided her toward the exit. Her heels clattered against the marble, a rhythm once confident, now frantic. The double doors opened, not with fanfare but with finality. She disappeared into the corridor beyond, her protestations muffled as the doors shut. And just like that, the hall exhaled. For the first time all night, the air was clear. Guests murmured softly, not in confusion but in awe. Some clapped, tentative at first, then stronger, until the sound became a standing ovation, not for the downfall but for the man who had endured it with silence, dignity, and power. Elena lowered her phone, stunned. She whispered into her mic, "History just happened in this room." Marcus waited for the applause to settle before he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Each word carried the weight of the night. "You mistook silence for weakness," he said, scanning the hall, letting the words land on every pair of eyes. But silence was only the test. Tonight, you saw the results. The hall froze, then erupted again, this time in applause, untainted by hesitation. The ovation was for him, for the justice that had unfolded without shouting, without violence. Marcus adjusted his jacket, nodded once, and stepped back from the center of the storm he had quietly mastered. The banquet would continue, contracts would be signed, alliances redrawn, but nothing about this night would be remembered for business deals. It would be remembered for the man Victoria Langford tried to erase. Richard Cho sat frozen at his table, his empire now under Marcus's name. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The balance of power had shifted in a single evening, and he had been reduced to a spectator. Marcus turned toward the young server who had spoken up earlier. Their eyes met. Marcus gave a single nod, a silent thank you that meant more than applause. The server straightened with pride, knowing he had stood on the right side of history. Elena ended her recording, her hands still trembling. She knew before she even uploaded the footage that it would ignite across the internet. Millions would see it. Millions would hear the line that closed the night. Marcus walked toward the doors, every step measured, deliberate. He paused once, just before leaving the hall, and spoke the words that would seal the memory of this night forever. "I don't need cameras to prove what happened here. I am the proof." The doors opened. The ovation thundered, and Marcus Reed, once accused of crashing a banquet, walked out as the man who owned it.